Welcome to Time to Teach with Tammy, the podcast that gives tips, advice, and suggestions to teachers by a real teacher. So sit back and enjoy. And oh yeah, don't forget to subscribe. We're back. Welcome to episode 37 entitled Understanding I Don't Understand Part 2. If you did not catch Part 1, you'll definitely want to go there and catch up first. That was actually episode 35. And that's where we looked at understanding and took a deep dive really in understanding. And we are going to continue that conversation today. Before we continue, I want to preface this by saying, you can probably tell by my voice I'm a little bit sick. Yesterday, I almost completely lost my voice. I had very little voice, and then thankfully I'm actually able to speak a little bit louder than whisper today. So this is progress, people. I am feeling happy about that. Also, a quick update if you caught my episode last week and you're wondering, so I had explained that after the episode, I had a really horrible pain in what seemed to be my hip area at the joint. And the last that I had you guys updated, I had gone to do x-rays and an MRI. I have the results back. It looks like it was a muscle lesion and rupture of the tendons. And I picked up the results and read the diagnosis there, but I still have to meet with the doctor to have him explain it. So I guess I will be meeting with him next week. Finally made an appointment for that, and then I'll find out what the next steps are, but I'm not really in pain anymore. Well, I'm not at all. I was immediately put on painkillers and muscle relaxers, so I'm feeling pretty good just dealing with all of that stuff. Okay, let's go ahead and dive right into our wins and fails for the week. Okay, so my win for the week, so this past week, I have, we've started a new cycle of math centers. We have like 5 different centers, and we do one a day, and sometimes if math workshop is very busy, we won't do a center that day, so it could take longer than actually 5 days to cycle through all of the math centers. But I kind of had an idea, and I think it was sparked by something I saw on Twitter. Again, you guys, get on Twitter if you're not on Twitter, because all the great teachers are there, and you will have access to all their great ideas and things that they're doing. But I saw an activity about this paper town, or no, it was a shape town, and that gave me the idea to do a paper town with my students, but I wanted to make it I wanted to add a little bit of limitations there so they could only use shapes. And again, of course, that was inspired by the shape town. So they have to make a paper town, and they could only use squares, rectangles, triangles, circles, ovals, and lines. And so that's kind of the challenge in it, and they have to work in their group, they have to collaborate, and it's all basically up to them. They kind of decide. The only thing I told them is they're going to have until they're going to have about a month to do it, because there's only 20 minutes to a math center, so they're going to need quite a bit of time, and they're only doing that center once a week, so they have about a month to get it done. So the only parameters there are basically it has to be a completed town, and that they have to use the specific shapes. And of course, I'm looking for teamwork. They design it, they plan it, they build it. It's all them, 100% them. to get us started with it, I asked parents if they would just, bring in cereal boxes as they were finished with them, Kleenex boxes, anything of cardboard, and then that way we could use that for the paper towns. And so basically their towns are being built on poster boards, and they are having a ball with it, you guys. It is so much fun. I actually had them the first day, and this was their math warm-up. Instead of we usually do a math warm-up in our math journal, they worked in their teams to design their towns. I had them think about our own town. We live in a large city, Guadalajara. Think about the things that you see every day. What kind of buildings, what kind of things do you see? What would you want in your town? And they talked about it, thought about it, talked about it, designed it, and then that's what they're using to actually go ahead and create their town. So that's kind of the blueprints to it. And it's just really neat to watch them as they decide how they're going to construct their buildings. A couple of them wanted to build castles, which I showed them some examples of paper towns. And there were some pretty cool ones that had castles. So a couple of the groups cut their idea that they really wanted castles also. And so they're just completely designing it. They are using cereal boxes, Kleenex boxes, like I said, construction paper, clay, really anything that they want to build this town. So I don't know, I just love it for kind of the problem solving aspect, the collaboration, the design thinking. Now my fail for the week is kind of goes hand in hand with my win. So my same fail is, I had told them that they can use flat shapes, they can use 3D shapes. I did give them that option, and I noticed with one group they were just using all flat shapes, which is okay. They stayed within the perimeter, but I just kind of thought that town didn't quite look the way that I was hoping the towns would be, because remember, these are like 5 and 6 year olds who are designing and creating it themselves. So even though it's maybe not coming out as beautiful as some of these Pinterest towns, I really do have to give them credit for doing it themselves. And I think it's the thinking involved that really matters the most. And if you've been listening to me for a while, you probably already know that the aesthetics is not so important to me as it is that my students are hands-on and building and experimenting and creating. So it has to be them. But it was interesting. Today's group, they added a bunch of 3D buildings. They had a building, like an office building. They had a castle, a little house, and a tree. So and a park with grass. And that was really, really neat, because just the way that they collaborated to do it. I'm kind of overseeing that center, and my TA is overseeing another center, and then the other ones are working independently. I really try to design my centers so that they can work independently in case a teacher is gone. Well, there would always be one teacher, but in case I don't have my TA that day, I want to be able to, I don't want to restrict myself, basically. So, so they are not coming out the way that they look on Pinterest, but, so that's kind of a fail, but the actual objective behind it, I feel like, is happening, and that's the most important part. So, that's a win and a semi-fail for the week. Okay, so let's go ahead and get today's episode started. So again, if you haven't already listened to episode 35, which is part 1, you want to go back and listen to that first or after is fine. It's just that this goes along with the 6 facets of understanding by design, which was written by Grant Wiggins and Jay McTighe. So in episode 35, we talked about the first 3 facets of understanding, and just to kind of brief everyone on that again, we had facet 1, which is explanation, facet 2, interpretation, and then facet 3, application. So we'll go ahead and get started with facet 4, which is perspective. I will start with the same opening that the book does for perspective. So I'm reading from page 95, and it is a quote from John Dewey. And it says, "The profit of education is the ability it gives to make distinctions that penetrate below the surface. One knows that there is a difference between sound and sense, between what is emphatic and what is distinctive, between what is conspicuous and what is important." And that's directly under the beginning. So we're looking at perspective, and they're defining it as critical and insightful points of view. So when we think about perspective, it's really the student's ability to understand that everything is written with, the author's going to have some kind of experience or some kind of bias or some type of point of view that is going to really impact that piece. So it's really the idea that students have that perspective. It's a mature perspective. It really takes understanding that something can be influenced, especially when I think right now we're living in a time, we're hearing it all the time. We have to be careful about things that we listen to, things that we read, and understand, is this something that's being put out with someone or someone's with a specific political agenda or political view, and is that influencing this piece, be it a news article, maybe a news that I'm watching, anything like that. Really having the ability to understand that there is going to be that kind of influence in different kinds of work. So here is some of the questions that they pose when you're really thinking about perspective. From which vantage point? What is justified or warranted? Is there adequate evidence? Is it reasonable? What are the strengths and weaknesses of the idea? Is it plausible? And here are some examples of when we see perspective being used. A 10-year-old girl recognizes in TV advertising the fallacy of using popular figures to promote products. A student explains the Israeli and Palestinian arguments for and against new settlements on the Gaza Strip. So you would have to be able to understand the different perspectives other than your own to really be able to understand and critically think about where this piece, I'm just calling a piece for anything, where this piece is coming from. Now, one area that's really interesting in this section of perspective is, Wiggins and McTighe really make the argument that they don't believe schools offer students ample opportunities to pursue differing views and to question an argument and look at maybe the different theories that would contradict whatever information, whatever piece they're looking at. So they really make the argument that classes, when we're thinking about instructing and including perspective, that students have to be given the time to actually explore what are some different points of view regarding this. What are some different or alternative theories, and really make up a lot of the coursework, not just something that's offered, if you finish as a way to enrich or continue working, if you have finished whatever unit it is, and let's say a student finishes early, but really that all students truly need ample time to be able to look at various viewpoints. Okay, moving right along to facet 5, which is probably one of my favorite facets. It is empathy. And here they've defined it as the ability to get inside another person's feelings and worldview. Okay, and then I'll read a little bit from their opening here. When reading the works of an important thinker, look first for the apparent absurdities in the text and ask yourself how a sensible person could have written them. When you find an answer, when those passages make sense, then you may find that more central passages, ones you previously thought you understood, have changed their meaning. And that is from Thomas Kuhn, I think. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correct, on reading scientific text. Okay, so basically, I don't think I really have to define empathy beyond that. I think we know what it is. But, again, just like we said, perspective was a mature facet. So really, so is empathy, because we know that a lot of students are very egocentric, and especially when they're very young, they don't, they're learning about the world around them, and they're learning that there are other people who have feelings, and they're learning how to care for them and care about them. So, it is something that takes a while, a long while really, to establish this. Here are some questions that the authors pose for empathy. How does it seem to you? What do they see that I don't? What do I need to experience if I am to understand? What was the writer, artist, or performer feeling, thinking, seeing, and trying to make me feel and see? And here are some examples. An adolescent empathizes with the restrictive lifestyle of his bedridden grandmother. From a British national exam, Romeo and Juliet, Act 4. Imagine you are Juliet. Write your thoughts and feelings, explaining why you have to take this desperate action. So it's really being able to put yourself, thinking about the other person and how they are feeling and understanding it yourself. Said in another way, it's really putting yourself in someone else's shoes. Now, it can seem that empathy and perspective are very closely related, because it does mean kind of standing back, but there is a difference. And I'm going to just kind of read the first couple of sentences on page 98, where they start to talk about those differences. Empathy is different from seeing in perspective, which is to see from a critical distance, to detach ourselves in order to see more objectively. With empathy, we see from inside the person's worldview. So with perspective, you understand where that person is coming from. You're understanding the viewpoints. It doesn't really mean that there is an emotional attachment. In fact, there isn't. It's objective, as they say. Whereas in empathy, you're really trying to get inside the feelings and understand exactly what that person would be feeling. So, closely related, but also very different. You are looking at understanding something aside from yourself, your thoughts and your feelings. But one you could think is maybe a little more cold. Perspective, if you want to think of it that way, it is a little cold because you're standing back. It's objective. Whereas empathy is going to be a little more warm. You're viewing it from inside the person's thoughts and feelings and viewpoints. And one might ask, okay, well, why is empathy so important? Why do my students truly need to get inside and understand the emotions of someone else? Well, we have to remember our students' world that they're living in, and that day-to-day contact with other students, things that happen inside the classroom, perhaps things that happen outside of the classroom, within the school, or even beyond the school and outside of the school's walls. Our students are interacting with each other very heavily, socially and also academically. And they're not always going to agree with each other. They're not always going to share the same ideas. But we have to have a way for them to try to understand the other person, because when we understand others better, we can empathize with them, then it's truly a game changer. It opens us up to maybe things that we would otherwise not even be open up to. Maybe I'm not even going to listen to your idea if, I think it's silly, and I'm going to completely block myself from even entertaining what you have to say. So we can see in those cases our students are interacting heavily, and we truly need them to be able to have an open mind, have an open heart, which is something I always tell my kids: open mind, open heart, and really try to understand where the other person is coming from, to the point where, we see why they would feel that way. And when we can do that, when we can empathize with others, then, our interactions also are going to be a lot warmer than they would be otherwise. Okay, and last facet is self-knowledge, and they define it as the wisdom to know one's ignorance and how one's patterns of thought and action inform as well as prejudice understanding. So I think we probably know that self-knowledge is really knowing yourself and truly understanding, understanding your own limitations, maybe understanding things like your learning styles, your preferences, and understanding how that might have an impact on the things that you do, and making decisions because of it. A couple of examples that the book gives are: a mother realizes that her frustration with her daughter's shyness is rooted in issues from her own childhood. And then, mindful of her learning style, a middle school student deliberately uses graphic organizers to help her study. So here are some questions as we're thinking about self-knowledge. How does who I am shape my views? What are my limits? What are the limits of my understanding? What are my blind spots? What am I prone to misunderstand because of prejudice, habit, or style? So this is truly a deep understanding. The book even calls it wisdom. We have to really first understand ourselves truly, because it's this self-knowledge that's also going to help us to lead to other things that we don't actually understand. So it has to start with us. To give an example of myself, I know that I'm someone who I really like to process information a lot, and feel like I need to process it a lot before I fully understand it and can implement something. I just like to look at it from many different angles and think about it. And because of this, I will usually take a lot of time on something, and I know that about myself. So I'll make sure that I am giving myself enough time. So let's say I need to prepare for something, or I want to learn about something. I know that I'm going to need ample time and probably look for many different resources so that I can try to understand whatever it is that I'm doing as best as I can. So this is also why I won't be quick to start something and really try to understand it and look at it at the different angles. So I know that about myself, and that allows me to plan for the kind of time that I'm going to need if I'm going to be taking something on. One of the implications in the book that they talk about is, it's really important that students have time to do self-reflecting, self-assessing, and we have to do it. I started a couple of years ago having my kids use checklists to kind of reflect on what they do, what they're doing well, what they're not doing well, setting goals. And at first I felt it to be, I was scared because it was new, and I just thought, well, my little 5 and 6 year olds, this is really kind of beyond them, I thought. But since I've started to implement it with the workshop model, I have just been blown away by how well even young learners, if you teach them how to reflect, and yes, they're going to need a lot of support initially, a lot of scaffolding and modeling to them, but they can learn how to do this on their own. So they really truly can do this even at a young age. So we do this all the time in writing workshop, in reading workshop. They'll reflect on, what is a reading strategy that we call reading powers that you are really good at, and you feel like you have mastered that, and what is something that you feel like you can still work on. And then they'll set that as a goal, and then we might talk about the different things that they can do to help them get to that goal. And no, it's mind-blowing that even at the young ages they can do that. It's not only limited to upper elementary and middle school and high school. No, our young learners can be taught to do this. Okay, well, that really summarizes the last facet, self-knowledge. It's important to remember that all of these 6 facets of understanding are really meant to be developing truly deep understanding with our students. Not just knowledge, although we know that knowledge is important. They are going to have to learn some facts. They are going to have to acquire skills. But, they're students in this kind of design plan where we're talking about the backwards design, and specifically when we look at understanding by design from Wiggins and McTighe, that they're really meant to be, students are meant to be questioning things. It's really an inquiry process that's happening, and they use the term uncover as opposed to cover. So a lot of times we teachers might find ourselves covering material, covering content, and I have to get through this, I have to cover this, and coverage only gets us so far, and it doesn't mean that student learning happened. So, and I always say this, just because we taught it doesn't mean that our students learned it. So we must uncover those big ideas, the true meaning that is embedded within a unit that is designed backwards from, intentionally around big ideas with its goal of deep understanding. And that's what we're really kind of doing with this. All right, you guys. So with that is going to wrap up today. Today we took a look at the last 3 facets, which are perspective, empathy, and self-knowledge. So on that note, you guys, today's episode is a wrap. Thank you so much for joining me. I really hope that you got something out of this. If you did, would you please let me know? I love hearing from you guys. I can be found on Twitter. My handle is @Tammy. That's TAMI J123. And let me know, are you using the 6 facets of understanding? If so, how are you using them in your class? I'd love to hear from you. Until next time.
Wait a minute. Wait 1 minute. Before you go, don't forget you can catch our show notes online at www.timetoteach.libsyn. That's libsyn.com. We're also on Facebook at Time to Teach. Don't forget to check out our Facebook group, Teachers for Effective Curriculum. And if you're an educator with your own podcast show, I invite you to join our brand new Facebook group, Teachers Who podcast. Let's grow a community where we can network, problem solve, and discuss anything and everything podcast related. I'll see you there.